Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 build guide. Today we're covering the best tank in Baldur's Gate 3 for Karlach or a main character as a barbarian to tank for their team. This is the actual build that I use for Karlach, so I'm using her as the example character. This build is heavily tested in play. I think it's excellent when paired with other characters, and I will also be doing a second version of the build as a variant build designed to play solo if you want to solo Tactician as a melee character. I will say that the solo build will have probably a slightly harder time soloing the game than a spellcaster or ranged character designed to solo, because you, as a melee character, get less access to ranged abilities and so on, but as a main tank for a party, this build I think basically can't be beaten, so let's get right into it. First off, what we have to do is we've got to fix Karlach's stats. Like all the Origin characters, she comes with an attribute spread that is less than ideally laid out, so we're going to fix that, although hers is not as bad as many of the others. Let's take this down to 16 strength, because we don't need an odd number, and we don't need this charisma, of course, so we can then get ourselves up to 16 constitution for significantly more HP, and 14 dexterity, which will give us maximum AC bonus in most medium armors, as well as better initiative, which is of course super important, especially for a tank who needs to get onto opponents. One thing that I will mention as well is that Karlach's default race, the one that, the race that she is the worst race in the entire game, I think, for barbarians. The reason for this is that Zariel Tiefling's unique ability is a smite that they can do, which is both a bonus action and a spell. It takes a bonus action to rage, or to jump, which are things that barbarians are going to be doing a lot on their turns, so you won't be able to use a smite on the same turn that you rage, you won't be able to use a smite on the same turn that you jump or push, and those are actions you'll be taking a lot, and they're spells, so once you've already started your rage, you can't use them again. You can no longer use your smites at all, which means that the racial abilities of the Zariel Tiefling are completely wasted for a barbarian in almost every situation. If you are a main character building this character from the start, then you are going to want to go with our good old friend, the Wood Elf, because the extra movement speed is incredibly powerful. I also don't hate the Dwergar, even though you lose movement speed, the Enlarge once per day can be quite useful, and Half-Orc is classic for a reason, as are Dragonborn. Both of those have reasonable abilities. Mostly the damage resistances that you get from Dragonborn can be really strong, but Zariel Tieflings, unfortunately, do not synergize with Barbarian, so we'll have to work around that when we're building Karlach out. For our skill selection, for Karlach, the only important thing is that you have Athletics and Perception. Those are really important skills to have access to in your team, and of course your Barbarian is going to be doing most of your pushing and throwing, so Athletics is really important. For a main character, you might want to take a second conversation skill, maybe move some of these points from wisdom into charisma if you want to have more conversation skills and your main character to do more of the talking, but for the most part I think that this default skill layout for Karlach is actually quite good. Barbarians are interesting in that they're quite front-loaded. They get almost all of the power on the character in the first 5 levels, and then at 7th level they get one of the best abilities in the game, but they pretty much don't get any upgrades after that. So we want to find a breakpoint where we're going to move away from taking Barbarian levels, but we also want to maximize our feats. So we're only going to take 8 levels of Barbarian and then 4 levels of something else in order to generate 3 feats still, but still get the boosts of other classes. So let's keep going with our Barbarian here. Since we are intending to build a tank, we don't need to make any decisions here, but since we're intending to build a tank for our team, we're going to go with one of the best defensive abilities in the entire game, the Wildheart Barbarian's Bearheart Rage. The reason for this, of course, is that you have resistance to all damage except for psychic damage when raising, so that effectively doubles your HP. Since we have 16 Constitution, our character is going to have an enormous amount of HP which doubling it with the damage resistance is going to mean that you can tank forever. There are two things that a tank needs to be successful in a party. One is survivability, and that's pretty obvious. You can't do your job if you get knocked down by anything that attacks you. And two, we need a way to force the enemies to attack us. That's where this next level comes in. At level 4, rather than upgrade our strength, which seems like the sort of natural upgrade, we're actually going to take a feat, and that feat is Sentinel. Sentinel means that the enemies have to focus you, because you're going to be using your reaction to make attacks against them anytime they attack a different ally. So your Barbarian will always have to be the target of enemies, or will be consistently laying out free damage. Either way, you win. Secondly, it keeps enemies next to the Barbarian, or in AoE effects. You can very easily keep an enemy inside a fog cloud and blinded, inside a poison cloud or stinking cloud and unable to move, by using your Sentinel attack to stop them from moving, and your Barbarian's ability to push enemies to throw them back into AoE effects that your other party members have laid down. The advantage on opportunity attacks is quite useful, because we're not upgrading our to-hit modifier at this level, we would need extra abilities to hit, but because Barbarians have Reckless Attack and Sentinel gives us advantage on opportunity attacks, we're still going to hit more often than an equivalent character with 18 strength would, because we'll so often be attacking at advantage. Reckless Attack you should also be using very regularly, because pretty much any time you should be using Reckless Attack, because the enemies are going to attack you because they have advantage against you, and the enemy AI in this game, of course, prioritizes opponents that it has advantage against, and you want them to be hitting your character because you'll be taking half damage from every attack. So Sentinel is incredibly useful for basically all features of this character. You should keep an eye out for some kind of reach weapon that allows you to attack at a longer distance, so that your Sentinel attacks and your opportunity attacks are better. So a spear, a glaive, anything that gives you additional reach on your attacks. As we level up, we get another one of the excellent things that Barbarians get, which is fast movement. Movement speed is super important for every character. There's a reason I recommend Wood Elves for pretty much every character that we build here, but fast movement on a tank is even more important because you're a melee attacker, so you of course have to close the distance to do that, and it's so important that you be locking down important enemies. You can lock down enemy melee attackers before they get to your ranged attackers in the back. You can get yourself next to enemy spellcasters and hit them. One item to keep an eye out for is the Act 1, you get a greatsword that silences enemies. That can be incredibly useful on this character because it will stop enemy spellcasters from casting, of course, which is an extremely powerful effect. You also get extra attack, which doubles your damage output and is super useful. We're obviously never going to change our bestial heart here, but we are going to, because we still want the rage, and as you can see, we get the smite upgrades, which don't particularly help on Karlach. My advice with the smites is to find a situation where you don't want to spend a rage charge, but still just have an extra bonus action, and use the smites there. Use them early and often, because you won't have a ton of opportunities to use them since you can't cast them while raging. Here at level 6, we get an aspect of the beast. These are mostly small bonuses, but one of them is much better than all of the others, I believe. And that one, of course, as I've talked about before, is the aspect of the elk. This is a day-long buff for you and your entire party that gives them an extra 5 feet of movement speed. Movement speed is so important both for this character, and of course will let your other party members position themselves where you want them more easily as well. At level 7, we get what might actually be the single best class feature in the game. Maybe the Tempest Sorcerer's fly speed rivals it, but +3 initiative and can't be surprised is huge. One difference between Baldur's Gate 3 and tabletop 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons is that Initiative in Baldur's Gate 3 is rolled on a d4 instead of a d20. So a +3 bonus is the same to initiative in Baldur's Gate 3, is equivalent to a +15 bonus to initiative in tabletop Dungeons & Dragons, because you're rolling on a number that's 1/5 as big. Any bonuses to initiative that you get in Baldur's Gate 3 are huge and will significantly increase the likelihood of you winning initiative. It's also really important that your whole party wins initiative, because then you can choose the order that your characters act in. Since all the characters that win initiative on one side get to go all at once, you can choose which order they act in, which means you can set up sneak attacks for your rogue, you can lay down AoEs, and then run this barbarian character up and push the enemies into those AoEs. Let's say you cast a wall of fire, and then Karlach runs up and pushes someone into it. That's an incredibly powerful combo. So winning initiative is really good, both, of course, because you get to go first, and that's incredibly powerful, but also because it lets you choose the order of your actions, which is extremely important. And finally, we take one more level of Barbarian, where we don't particularly gain anything other than difficult terrain passage, which is useful. It certainly stops you from having to worry about a lot of locations in the game, but most importantly, we just get a feat, and we're able to boost our strength to 18, where we'll start doing significantly more damage. You can also, of course, use elixirs of Hill Giant Strength if you want on this character, and then you don't have to put points in strength. That would let you raise your constitution, for example. But assuming that you're not going to be taking elixirs every day, then you obviously want to raise your strength. But now we've pretty much gotten everything that is good out of the Barbarian. Certainly Brutal Critical is a totally reasonable class feature that's nice to have, but it's not as good as what we would get from another character, and it's not as good as a feat, so we're going to try to put 4 levels into another class. In this case, the other class that we're going to put 4 levels into is the Fighter. Fighters give you a fighting style, which allows you to use, in my opinion, defense fighting style is actually the best, because this character will switch between being a one-handed attacker and a two-handed attacker, although you can also go for protection if you are finding yourself carrying a shield for most of the game, which in fact you quite possibly will be. Shields in this game are incredibly strong, and the bonuses for attacking two-handed are less powerful often than shields would be, and just getting the magic effects of a shield and the additional AC. So protection can be quite useful as well. You could also go with great weapon fighting if you really just want to do damage, but I recommend defense or protection. In this case, I'm going to take protection because it's really good to have a reaction. One thing that this character doesn't have a lot of is reactions that aren't opportunity attacks, and so finding a way to use your reactions effectively can be quite useful. So that this allows you to lock down enemies and prevent them from attacking your allies, or hit them when they do attack your allies with Sentinel. You could also, if you find yourself not using that particularly often, just take defense, which is always good. Then, of course, you get Action Surge, which is the reason that many characters want to go into 2 levels of Fighter. Gaining an extra action to use once per short rest is, of course, incredibly powerful. You can use it to just lay out another 2 attacks, which is great. We take level 3 Fighter, and we take the Battlemaster Fighter. This, I think, is almost always the best one for a 3-level dip, because maneuvers are so powerful, and you'll want to take Trip Attack, Precision Attack, which allows you to hit, especially because we're still at this point 2 points lower on strength than most characters would be. Trip Attack can be quite useful, and for the last one, I suggest maybe Pushing Attack or Riposte. Riposte is really good, since then you now have a reaction to attack whether they attack an ally or an enemy, so we'll probably take that one. And finally, at level 4 Fighter, we get a feat and are able to increase our strength. So I think that this is going to be the cleanest and easiest build, and it will give you a ton of tanking options for your party as well as for your main character. Let me talk a little bit about the strategy of playing this character as well. So one thing to keep in mind is that, well, you need to cast Aspect of the Elk at the beginning of every day. One thing to keep in mind is that you have unarmored defense, meaning that your default AC, let me take these gloves off, your default AC is going to be a minimum of 15 because you have +3 AC from your Constitution and +2 AC from your Dexterity. If you find items that boost your AC when you are unarmed, such as, for example, these bracers of defense, there's a decent chance that you will be able to swap to an unarmored build. And so you should keep an eye out for times when you will have more AC by wearing the bracers of defense and not wearing armor, which gives us a base AC of 17, versus wearing medium armor. Don't be afraid to wear armor, though, and you will often just prefer to be in medium armor because of the powerful effects of that armor. One piece of armor particularly to keep in mind is near the end of Act 1, you get the Adamantine Scale Mail if you choose it, and I strongly suggest you do, because being immune to critical hits is incredibly powerful, and especially powerful on a barbarian, since enemies will so often be attacking you with advantage, they have a double chance to critically hit. So keep an eye out for that. Also, go back and forth between using a one-handed weapon and a shield and a two-handed weapon regularly, because many times you will just want the additional AC and sometimes you'll want the additional damage. Keep both in your inventory and make sure that you are using the weapon that's appropriate to the fight you're about to have, whether you need just more damage or whether you want more survivability. Against a spellcaster, swap in your two-handed weapon. Against non-spellcasting enemies, you'll almost always just want the AC since they'll be attacking you more regularly. Finally, another thing to mention about Karlach specifically is she has these soul coins, which basically function as an extra elixir. You can use these and an elixir in the same turn, and they will give you, or in the same day, and you'll get the elixir bonus as well as a d4 of extra fire damage on all your attacks, which can be really powerful, especially if you're making multiple attacks around. Finally, one other item I just wanted to quickly highlight is this Haste Helm, which I believe you get during Act 1. Additional movement speed, like I said, is super powerful, and momentum, let me just bring up that tooltip in case you don't know exactly what it does, because it's confusing, but basically it gives you 15 bonus movement speed at the beginning of a fight, so combined with your barbarian fast movement speed and your aspect of the elk, you will have 60 feet of movement speed on the first turn of a fight, which will get you into combat much faster and more reliably, or 65 feet if you're a wood elf or half wood elf. Another good racial choice actually is Githyanki because of the once per day Misty Step. That can be super powerful, so consider that as well if that appeals to you. Finally, I am going to reset our character's levels and talk about how to build this character as a solo character. Obviously, we're not going to need to do a number of the ways to defend our allies are irrelevant as a solo character, so we'll probably want to do a couple different build options as we level up. I'm also going to recommend building this character one way and then respecking when you hit level 5, so I'll talk about that in a second. Our stat spread is going to be the same, although again, if you want to increase your charisma a little to have some conversational abilities, you can do that with a solo character, whether that be origin story Karlach or any Tav that you want. It can still be useful to have some conversation skills. Then we're going to take this level, which we don't make any decisions on. And then at level 3, we are instead going to take, of Wildheart, we're going to take Berserker. The reason for that is that you get the Frenzied Strike action, and you don't have a lot of uses for bonus actions on this character, other than the one that you're going to use initially when raging. Frenzied Strike gives you a second attack. At level 3, you don't have extra attack yet, so Frenzied Strike doubles your damage output, which is incredibly powerful, and better, I think, than having your incoming damage, like Wildheart, for at least the early levels in the game, since it's mostly about bursting down enemies quickly when you're soloing. Next, we're going to take ability improvement, and here we're just going to take Strength, because we don't need Sentinel when we don't have allies to protect, so we're going to ignore that. And then at level 5, you get extra attack. So I'm going to recommend at level 5, because the Frenzied Strike now increases your damage only by 50% rather than by 100%. So Frenzied Strike is significantly less effective once you've hit level 5. You respec and go back into Barbarian, of course. And then make the same decisions that we made earlier, taking Wildheart and gaining Bearheart. Then, of course, we take our bonus strength. Since you're soloing the game, I assume you won't mind the cheese of respeccing once during the game, which I know many people like to avoid, but of course, for solo Tactician mode, it's going to be required to make some decisions that you wouldn't make for a full party. Elk is still the right aspect to take, because even though it doesn't buff your allies, movement speed is even more powerful on Tactician, on solo Tactician, and remember that you can make ranged attacks with this character, so you can often just use your extremely high movement speed to make a ranged attack and then run away, kiting your enemy backwards. Feral Instinct is incredible and is the reason that, unlike most solo builds, for this build we can probably skip Alert. You could also take Alert at level 4 and then respec out of it into Strength once you have hit Feral Instinct, so that's another option for a respec. And then we're still going to go to Barbarian level 8 for our feat, just because it makes it cleaner, and because I think Land Stride is quite solid. You can also create areas of difficult terrain by dropping water and stuff on the ground, and then use Land Stride to get away from enemies. That's quite useful to do in a number of locations against certain kinds of enemies. And then we're just going to take our strength upgrade, of course. And then we're going to, instead of going straight into Fighter, we're actually going to make a quick dip into Cleric, because we can get the Light Domain Cleric, who has the strongest defensive ability in the game, incredibly powerful. The Light Domain Cleric gets Warding Flare, which allows you to use a reaction to impose disadvantage on an attacker, possibly causing their attack to miss. There's two interesting things about Warding Flare. One, unlike almost every other class ability, you can use it while raging. So you now have a reaction to basically boost your AC by 5 or cancel out the advantage of an enemy from Reckless Attack, which advantage or disadvantage is the equivalent of 5 AC. So you can always think of it as just giving yourself 5 AC. It's better than Shield, which is the second best defensive ability in the game, the Shield spell, because it also reduces their chance of critically hitting you and increases their chance of critically missing you. You won't be using any of the spells in particular, because you can't concentrate on them while raging, and you're going to be raging most fights, but there are still some uses that you can have. You can use Shield of Faith to just give yourself 2 armor class for before you rage. You'll lose concentration when you rage, but it's still very useful to just give yourself 2 armor class all day. And Healing Word is quite good just to have an option to heal yourself. You can also bless yourself before a fight, and then you get some extra damage or extra to hit, which is super useful. Protection from evil and good can be quite useful in some encounters. Be creative with your level 1 spells, because it's an extremely powerful resource. Cleric is the single best 1-level dip for a reason. And then we're going to go back into Fighter, because you get everything that you want out of Fighter just with 3 levels. You can take your defense fighting style here. And for the solo build, I recommend, again, you're going to switch quite heavily between using a shield and one-handed weapon and using a two-handed weapon. But because we still hit 20 strength without needing our 3rd feat, because we don't need Sentinel in this build, and we do get the best defensive ability in the game in Warding Flare, this is going to help a lot with survivability for soloing. You can also move the cleric level earlier if you're finding yourself having trouble on certain enemies. Some very powerful melee enemies are going to give you quite a lot of difficulty in solo modes, just because when you're a melee character and they're a melee character, you're basically comparing your two sets of stats to one another. And then, of course, we're going to take the same set of maneuvers. So you could, if you wanted to, move some of the barbarian levels later. I would suggest getting at least level 5 barbarian as soon as possible, because extra attack is so important to these builds. But if you want to stay a frenzy barbarian for a little bit longer, then you can have a sort of half an extra attack from that, and then move the cleric and fighter levels a little earlier, giving yourself some more defensive options at the cost of a little bit of damage. But having the barbarian, the bear totem rage that reduces damage by half, is so important for your survivability that I recommend this build order for the solo version of this character. Finally, for solo characters, just because you need all the advantages you can get, you can definitely respec, put more points in dexterity, and use the Elixir of Hill Giant Strength. And also in Act 2, you can get these Gloves of Dexterity, and that can let you have more armor with no armor or with medium armor that gives you full AC. Something else to keep in mind, and I should have mentioned this for the other build, the party build as well, is that any set of medium armor that gives you your full dexterity modifier is extremely powerful on this character, especially alongside the Gloves of Dexterity. You can really boost your AC quite high. 24 AC plus Warding Flare is going to give you make you extremely hard to hit, and that's without any bonuses from anything like the Defender's Flail that you get sometime in Act 2 that boosts your AC by 1, like the Evasive Shoes that give you extra armor class, any other items that give you extra armor class. So keep in mind that you can build really high AC on this character just with a few choice magic items. Alright, my friends, this has been my pick for the best tanking build and the best barbarian build in Baldur's Gate 3. Really good in a party, really good and viable solo, I think. A little harder probably than the Gloomstalker build that I mentioned earlier, or the Warlock build that I have posted. Those are both kind of designed to solo the game, and this one is more designed as to help your party, but I believe is also quite capable of soloing, given some strategic play and good item choices. Alright, my friends, thanks so much for watching, and as always, if you've enjoyed the video, do please leave a thumbs up and leave a comment. Both of those things help a lot with the algorithm, and I love getting comments, and you can subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content. I've also gotten my very first channel member today, as of the date of recording, so I want to say thank you so much to McDonough, who was my first channel member, and if you feel inspired to become a channel member, the button's right below the video, but of course I don't expect that from anyone necessarily, but would really appreciate it if you did. Alright, my friends, cheers, and GG.